My name is Viola, and at 39 years old, I thought loyalty meant something. For 13 years, I was the brain behind King Logistics, helping build my father-in-law's empire from a local courier service into a shipping giant. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and even my best friend's wedding to ensure every container arrived on time. I thought I was indispensable. I thought I was family. But on New Year's Eve, in a room full of people drinking champagne, paid for by my hard work, Desmond King looked me in the eye and said, "We are replacing you, Viola. You are expired." He did not know that by firing me, he was not just losing a manager, he was handing the keys to his destruction directly to his biggest rival. Before I tell you how I brought down an empire with a single phone call, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been undervalued by the people who should have appreciated you the most. The bass from the ballroom thumped against the marble walls of the bathroom, vibrating through the soles of my heels. I was hiding in the third-floor guest powder room of Desmond King's Buckhead estate, surrounded by gold leaf wallpaper and imported orchids, trying to save the company millions. My phone was pressed to my ear, my free hand frantically scrolling through shipping manifests on my tablet. "Listen to me very carefully," I hissed into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the panic rising in my chest. "The reefer unit on container 409 at the port of Savannah has malfunctioned. That is 20 tons of grade A Wagyu beef sitting in 80-degree heat. You have exactly 45 minutes to transfer that cargo to a backup generator truck, or we lose the contract with the steakhouse chain. Do not tell me it is New Year's Eve. Do you think the beef knows what day it is? Call the emergency vendor in Garden City? Use my authorization code VKing01. Just get it done. Just..." I ended the call and leaned against the cold porcelain sink, closing my eyes for a brief second. My head was pounding. Below me, the elite of Atlanta were celebrating. I could hear the clinking of glasses and the murmur of expensive conversation. I should be down there. I was the chief operating officer of King Logistics. This party was technically celebrating our most profitable quarter, yet a quarter I had delivered through sleepless nights and sheer force of will. But here I was, fixing a disaster while wearing a $3,000 evening gown. I checked my reflection in the mirror. At 39, I looked tired. Not the good kind of tired that comes from a workout, but the deep, soul-crushing exhaustion of someone who has been running a marathon for 13 years without a water break. I touched the fine lines around my eyes. Desmond had made a comment about them last week, suggesting I try a new eye cream. I smoothed my black dress, took a deep breath, and put my professional mask back on. The crisis was averted. The beef was safe. The company was safe. Surely tonight I could finally relax. I walked down the grand spiral staircase, my hand trailing along the mahogany banister. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. Waiters circulated with trays of caviar and champagne. My husband Jamal was standing near the bar, laughing with his younger brother. He did not look up when I approached. He never did anymore. Desmond King stood at the front of the room, tapping a silver spoon against a crystal flute. The sound cut through the chatter, silencing the room. He looked regal in his velvet tuxedo, a man who believed he was a king in more than just name. He stood on a raised platform, looking down at the crowd with a benevolent smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Thank you all for coming," Desmond boomed, his voice filling the cavernous room. "Tonight we celebrate not just the new year, but a new era for King Logistics. We have had a record-breaking year, and we are poised for even greater heights." I straightened my posture, waiting for the acknowledgement. This was the moment. He always thanked the executive team. He always thanked me. I had prepared a modest nod, a smile that said it was a team effort. But first, Desmond continued, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. His smile tightened, just a fraction. "We must acknowledge that times change. The world of logistics is moving faster than ever. It is digital, it is social, it is young. To stay ahead, we need fresh energy. We need leadership that understands the language of the future, not just the grind of the past." My stomach dropped. The air in the room seemed to thin, making it hard to breathe. That is why I have made a difficult but necessary decision, Desmond announced. Effective immediately, we are restructuring the role of Chief Operating Officer. I froze. Restructuring. That was corporate speak for firing, but that was impossible. I was the COO. I was his daughter-in-law. I would like to introduce you to the future of King Logistics. Desmond gestured to the side of the stage. Please welcome our new Chief Operating Officer, Ashley King. The crowd parted and Ashley stepped forward. She was 24 years old, white blonde and glowing with the kind of youth that comes from never having worked a double shift in your life. She was my brother-in-law's new wife, a girl who spent her days posting lifestyle content on Instagram and her nights complaining that the warehouse smelled like diesel. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a bridal gown, and she was holding a selfie stick live streaming the entire moment. Thank you, Daddy Desmond. Ashley squealed, stepping onto the platform and kissing him on the cheek. Oh my God, you guys, this is so exciting. We are going to make logistics so aesthetic, like shipping containers, but make it fashion. Scattered applause broke out mostly from people too confused to do anything else. I stood rooted to the spot, my blood turning to ice. Ashley. He was replacing me with Ashley, a girl who thought a bill of lading was a person named Bill. Desmond looked at me then. It was not a look of apology. It was a look of challenge. Viola, he said into the microphone, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. We want to thank you for your service. You have been a workhorse, really. But at 39, let's be honest, you are tired. You have expired. The company needs youth. It needs vibrancy. It needs someone who understands the digital age. Ashley has 500,000 followers. That is the future. The room turned to look at me. I felt their eyes burning into my skin. Pity, amusement, shock. Desmond continued twisting the knife. We are giving you a generous severance package, Viola. You can finally rest. Go to a spa. Fix those stress lines. Let the next generation handle the heavy lifting. Ashley turned the camera toward me, beaming. Say hi to the live Viola. Do not worry, I will take good care of your little spreadsheets. You look like you need a nap anyway. I looked at Jamal, my husband of 15 years. He was standing next to his father, sipping his drink, avoiding my gaze. He knew. He had known this was coming, and he had said nothing. He had let me fix the crisis in the bathroom. Let me save his inheritance one last time, all while knowing they were about to throw me out like yesterday's trash. The humiliation was a physical pain, a sharp stabbing sensation in my chest. But as I looked at Ashley giggling into her phone and Desmond preening like a peacock, something else took over. It was colder than the champagne and harder than the diamonds on Ashley's finger. They thought I was just a middle-aged woman they could discard. They thought my value was in my labor, my ability to follow orders. They had forgotten one crucial thing. I did not just run the systems, I built them. Every password, every vendor relationship, every regulatory loophole was stored in my head, not in their servers. Desmond raised his glass. To the future, to Ashley. I did not raise my glass. Instead, I took a step forward, my heels clicking loudly on the parquet floor. The crowd parted for me, instinctively sensing the dangerous energy radiating from me. I walked until I was standing right below the platform, looking up at the man I had called father for over a decade. You think I am expired? Desmond? I asked, my voice calm, loud enough to carry without a microphone. Desmond laughed, a nervous sound. Now, Viola, do not make a scene. It is a party. I am not making a scene, I said, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. I am making a resignation. You want the future. You have got it. But remember one thing. Logistics is not about followers. It is about flow. And you just blocked the main artery. I turned to Ashley, who was still filming. Good luck with the morning shipment, Ashley. I hope your followers know how to clear customs for hazardous materials, because I certainly will not be doing it for you. I turned my back on them and started walking toward the door. I could hear Desmond sputtering behind me, but I did not stop. I walked past my husband, who finally looked up, his eyes full of fear. Viola, wait, Jamal whispered, reaching for my arm. Do not be like this. Boosiness is business. I pulled my arm away as if he were burning me. You are right, Jamal. Business is business. And I am closing my account. I walked out of the ballroom and into the cold Atlanta night, leaving the warmth and the lies behind me. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the rage in my heart. But as the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind me, I knew one thing for certain. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, and I was going to make sure they paid for it with interest. I stepped closer to the raised platform, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet that lined the center of the ballroom. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bones. All those eyes, hundreds of them, were fixed on me, waiting for the explosion. They expected tears or a tantrum, but I refused to give them that satisfaction. I looked up at Desmond, the man I had respected, the man I had treated like a father, and I saw nothing but cold calculation in his gaze. Desmond, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I built the supply chain infrastructure from scratch. I negotiated the union contracts in Chicago when everyone else was too afraid to sit at the table. I managed the port strikes last year without a single day of delay. Ashley does not know the difference between a pallet and a container. How can you say this is about leadership? Desmond sighed, the sound of a parent disappointed by a slow child. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass and leaned down, his voice dropping an octave so it vibrated with condescension. Viola, look at you. You are talking about unions and pallets. That is the old world. That is the grunt work. We are pivoting. We are becoming a lifestyle brand, not just a shipping company. He gestured to Ashley, who was busy adjusting the ring light attached to her phone case. Look at her, Desmond said. She represents freshness. She represents what is next. And you, Viola, let us be honest. At 39, you have expired. The word hung in the air like a slap. Expired, like a carton of milk left out on the counter. Like I was a perishable good that had lost its value simply because time had passed. You are tired, Viola, Desmond continued, relentless. The industry moves fast. We need energy. We need youth. Ashley has 500,000 followers on TikTok. When she posts a video, our stock ticks up. That is the future. You are a fax machine in a world of cloud computing, useful once but now just taking up space. Before I could respond, a bright light blinded me. Ashley had stepped off the platform and thrust her phone directly into my face. On the screen, I saw the livestream chat scrolling by, a waterfall of comments from strangers. Oh my God, you guys, look at this drama! Ashley chirped to her audience, her voice high and grating. This is exactly what I was talking about in my last Get Ready With Me video. Toxic workplace energy is so real. She tapped the screen, applying a heavy beauty filter over my face. The digital mask smoothed out my skin and enlarged my eyes, but it glitched as I moved, making me look distorted and monstrous. I put the glow filter on her, but honestly, you guys, even technology cannot fix those stress lines. Ashley laughed, looking at the camera instead of me. She looks so stressed and old, right? Like we need good vibes only in the boardroom. Hat, new era, and hashwad boss babe. She looked at me with the pity that felt sharper than hate. You should really drink more water, Viola, she said, loud enough for the donors in the front row to hear. Dehydration makes you look super haggard. Maybe you can use your severance pay for some Botox. My followers can give you a discount code. The room rippled with uncomfortable laughter. My husband Jamal stood 3 feet away, studying his shoes as if they were the most fascinating things on earth. He did not step in. He did not tell her to put the phone away. He let his wife be humiliated by a girl who was still in diapers when I started working for this family. I looked from Ashley's glowing screen to Desmond's smug face. They thought this was a victory. They thought shaming me would make me disappear, would make me small. But as I watched the digital hearts floating up the side of Ashley's screen, I realized something profound. They were not building a business, they were building a circus. And they had just fired the only person who knew how to keep the tent from collapsing. I am not stressed, Ashley, I said, my voice cutting through her narration. I am preparing. Because when you realize that filters do not fix logistics problems, you are going to need more than a discount code to save you. I turned away from the camera, refusing to be content for her feet any longer. But the sting of Desmond's words burned in my chest. Expired. I would show him exactly what happened when he threw away the only thing keeping his empire fresh. I turned my back on the ring light and the laughter, focusing my gaze on the one person in the room who owed me loyalty. Jamal was standing by the ice sculpture, his knuckles white as he gripped his tumbler of scotch. He looked impeccable in his bespoke tuxedo, the very picture of a supportive husband. But as I walked toward him, I saw the truth written in the slump of his shoulders. He was shrinking, trying to make himself invisible, trying to disappear into the gold wallpaper so he would not have to choose a side. Jamal, I said, stopping inches from him. My voice was low, intimate, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Tell him. Tell your father that this company collapses without me. Tell him about the Chicago contracts. Tell him who actually wrote the quarterly reports he is so proud of. Jamal finally looked at me, but his eyes did not hold the outrage I expected. Instead, they held a terrifying mixture of panic and resignation. He looked over my shoulder at Desmond, who was watching us with the cold indifference of a reptile waiting for its prey to stop struggling. Keep your voice down, Viola, Jamal hissed, taking a sip of his drink as if the alcohol could wash away his spine. Everyone is staring. You are making a scene. I am making a scene. I repeated the words, tasting like ash. Your father just humiliated me. He just told 500 people that I am expired trash. And you are worried about the volume of my voice. Jamal sighed and reached out to touch my arm, but I flinched away. He pulled his hand back, looking offended. Look, maybe he has a point. Not about the expired part that was harsh, sure, but about the rest. You have been working so hard lately. You are always stressed, always on the phone. Maybe it is time to slow down. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, painful rhythm. Slow down. Jamal. I am 39. I am at the peak of my career. I am not ready to retire to the porch to knit. But think about the lifestyle, Jamal said, his voice taking on a wheedling, pleading tone that made my stomach turn. You could finally relax. You could join the country club committee Mom is always talking about. Being a housewife is not a bad gig, Viola. You could redecorate the house. You could travel. Just let Ashley handle the headaches. I stared at him as if he were a stranger. This man I had shared a bed with for 15 years. This man I had supported while he failed at 3 different business ventures before settling into a cushy VP title his daddy gave him, was telling me to go play house while a 24-year-old influencer destroyed my life's work. Is that what you want? I whispered. You want a wife who lunches while you pretend to run a company you do not understand. Shh. Jamal glanced nervously at his father again. Please, Viola, do not make Dad angry. If we fight him on this, he could cut us off. The trust fund, the estate, the access to the jet. We have to play the game. Just apologize, say you were tired, and accept the severance. Please. For us. For us. The words hung in the air, a toxic cloud. There was no us. There was only him and his inheritance. He was 45 years old, and he was still a terrified little boy afraid of his father taking away his allowance. He was not protecting me. He was protecting his comfort. I looked at the man I married, and I saw nothing but a hollow suit. The loneliness that washed over me was absolute. It was colder than the winter air outside. I was not just unemployed. I was unmoored. I had no job, no title, and now I realized I had no husband. I was standing in a room full of people, and I was completely, entirely alone. You are right, Jamal, I said, my voice dead calm. I should not make your father angry. I should not be an obstacle to your inheritance. He let out a breath of relief, smiling that weak, spineless smile. Exactly, baby. I knew you would understand. Let's just go get a drink and we can smooth this over. I looked at his hand reaching for mine, and I felt a sudden violent clarity. I did not want to smooth it over. I wanted to burn it down. I looked at Jamal's hand reaching for mine and felt nothing. No spark, no comfort, just the cold realization that the man I had slept next to for 15 years was nothing more than a coward in a tuxedo. If there was no marriage left, there was no reason to play nice. I stepped back, my heels digging into the expensive carpet, creating distance between me and the family that had just cannibalized my career. Fine, Desmond, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the low murmur of the crowd. If I am expired, then cash me out. I want my commissions. For 13 years, you rolled my performance bonuses back into the company. You told me it was equity. You told me it was an investment in our shared future. Well, my future just walked out the door, so I want my payout. $500,000 plus interest. Cut the check, and I will leave quietly. Desmond laughed, but this time it wasn't nervous. It was a deep belly laugh that shook his velvet jacket. He looked around at his guests, inviting them to share in the joke as if I had just asked for the moon on a silver platter. Did you hear that, everyone? He boomed, his voice dripping with amusement. She wants a payout. He stepped closer to me, his cologne overpowering the scent of the expensive lilies. Viola, you really do not understand how this works, do you? There are no commissions for family. That money was not a debt. It was your duty. You were building this for Jamal, for your future children. It was your contribution to the legacy. You do not get paid for doing your job as a wife and daughter-in-law. I felt the blood drain from my face. Duty. He called 13 years of 60-hour weeks duty. While he bought yachts and Ashley bought designer handbags, I was working for free under the guise of family obligation. They had monetized my loyalty and called it love. That is illegal, Desmond, I whispered, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. We had an agreement. Desmond shrugged, taking a sip of his champagne. Do we? Or do we have a verbal understanding between a father and his daughter-in-law? Good luck proving that in court without bankrupting yourself first. And speaking of bankruptcy, let me make something very clear to you, Viola. He leaned in close, his eyes hard as flint, the benevolent patriarch mask slipping completely to reveal the tyrant underneath. The moment you walk out those double doors, you leave with nothing. The luxury SUV you drove here tonight. That is a company lease. The phone in your hand, company property, the credit cards in your purse, corporate accounts. I will freeze everything before you reach the front gate. He gestured to the rainy night beyond the windows. You walk out of here and you are destitute. No job, no car, no money. Just a middle-aged woman with a bad attitude and a long walk home in the rain. Stay and accept your place as Ashley's assistant, or leave with nothing. Those are your choices. I looked at Jamal, expecting him to protest, to say that this was too far, that you do not strip your wife of her basic dignity. But he just looked away, examining the ice in his glass, refusing to meet my eyes. He was letting his father strip me of everything, my dignity, my career, and now my financial survival. They had trapped me. They had used me until I was empty, and now they were threatening to leave me on the side of the road if I dared to ask for what I was owed. Desmond smiled, waiting for me to fold, waiting for me to beg. He thought the fear of poverty would make me stay. He thought I would accept the humiliation just to keep the heated seats and the platinum card. He thought he owned me. He was wrong. I looked at Desmond, the man who had just threatened to erase my existence with a few keystrokes. Then I looked at Ashley, who was still filming, her face illuminated by the artificial glow of her phone, waiting for my reaction so she could monetize my pain. Finally, I looked at Jamal, the man who had promised to love and cherish me, but was now hiding behind his father's velvet tuxedo, like a frightened child. You think you can trap me with a car and a credit card? I asked, my voice soft, but carrying a weight that silenced the room. You think my dignity has a price tag? You think I stayed for 13 years because of the heated seats? I reached for my left hand. The diamond on my finger was heavy, a symbol of a promise that had been broken long before tonight. It was a beautiful ring custom designed, but now it felt like a shackle. I twisted it, pulling it over my knuckle. It came off easily, as if my body was rejecting it too. I held it up, catching the light from the chandeliers. "This was the only thing you ever gave me that was truly mine, Jamal," I said, looking directly at my husband. "But even this feels like a bribe now. A shiny object to keep me quiet while you let your family devour me." I turned to Ashley, who was watching with wide, hungry eyes. "Here, Ashley. Something else for your collection. Something else you did not earn." I dropped the ring. It fell with a soft splash into her champagne flute, sending golden liquid spraying over her white dress. She shrieked, jumping back, but I did not flinch. Then I reached into my clutch. The key fob to the company Mercedes felt warm in my hand. It was a beautiful car, a symbol of my status, of my success. But Desmond was right. It was a leash. "You can have the car, Desmond," I said, tossing the keys onto the polished floor at his feet. The metal clattered loudly, a harsh sound in the silent room. "You can have the phone. You can have the accounts. You can have it all. Because none of it is worth my self-respect." I turned and walked toward the double doors. I did not look back. I could feel their eyes on me, could feel the weight of their shock and their judgment, but I kept walking. My heels clicked on the marble floor, a steady rhythm that sounded like freedom. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the night. The cold hit me instantly, a physical blow that stole my breath. It was raining, a freezing Atlanta downpour that soaked through my silk dress in seconds. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself, but I did not stop. I walked down the long, winding driveway, leaving the lights and the music and the warmth behind. I had no coat. I had no car. I had no money. My bank accounts were likely already frozen, my cards useless plastic in my purse. I was 39 years old, and I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the fire in my belly. The rain mingled with the tears on my face, hot and cold running together. I was terrified. I was furious. But as I reached the iron gates and stepped onto the public road, a strange feeling washed over me. It was not despair. It was clarity. They had stripped me of everything they thought mattered: money, status, comfort. But they had forgotten what I was made of. They had forgotten that before the private jets and the boardrooms, I was a girl who studied by candlelight because we could not afford electricity. I was a woman who built logistical empires from chaos. I looked back at the mansion glowing on the hill, a fortress of greed and betrayal. "Enjoy the champagne," I whispered to the rain, "because the hangover is going to be brutal." I started walking into the darkness, one step at a time, away from the life that had expired and toward the storm that was just beginning. I was cold. I was broke. But for the first time in 13 years, I was free. And they had no idea what a free woman could do. The Greyhound station was a world away from the velvet and crystal of Desmond's mansion. It smelled of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, flickering glow on the cracked linoleum floor. I sat on a hard plastic bench, my silk dress clinging to my skin like a second freezing layer. The hem was ruined, stained with mud and oil from the long walk in the rain. My hair, once perfectly styled, was now a tangled, wet mess plastered to my skull. I shivered uncontrollably, my teeth chattering in the damp cold. People walked by, giving me wide berths. To them, I must have looked like a madwoman, a fallen socialite who had stumbled out of a gala and into the gutter. A man with a ragged beard and a shopping cart full of cans stared at me for a long moment before shaking his head and muttering something I could not catch. I reached into the small, hidden pocket of my clutch, the only thing Desmond had not thought to confiscate: my personal phone. Not the company-issued one, but an old burner I kept for emergencies. It had 12% battery left. I powered it on my fingers, stiff and clumsy. A flood of notifications lit up the cracked screen. The first one was from my bank. Alert: joint checking ending in 4092. Withdrawal of $254,000 processed. Available balance. Dollars. I stared at the numbers, the zeros blurring together. $254,000. My life savings. My emergency fund. The money I had put away quietly, dollar by dollar, just in case the fairy tale ever ended. Gone. Another notification popped up. Alert joint savings ending in 33 on 18. Transfer of $82,000 and dollars completed. Available balance. $0. Jamal. He had not wasted a second. While I was walking in the rain, he was logging in, stripping me bare. He knew the passwords. He knew the security questions. We were husband and wife. What was mine was his. And now what was mine was gone. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal sound of rage and loss, but I swallowed it down. Screaming would not bring the money back. Screaming would just get me kicked out of the only shelter I had. I checked my credit cards. Declined. Frozen. Cancelled. Desmond had made good on his threat. He had erased me from the financial system. I had no cash, no cards, no assets, just a dead phone and a wet dress. I looked around the station at the tired faces of the other travelers. A mother rocking a crying baby. An old man sleeping with his head on a duffel bag. A group of teenagers laughing loudly near the vending machines. They all had somewhere to go. They all had a ticket, a destination, a plan. I had nothing. At 39 years old, after building a logistical empire that moved billions of dollars of goods around the world, I could not even afford a bus ticket to the next town. The irony was suffocating. I had spent my life optimizing routes, calculating risks, and ensuring safe passage for everyone else's cargo. But I had failed to secure the most important shipment of all, myself. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to preserve whatever body heat I had left. The cold was seeping into my bones, making my joints ache. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the graffiti-covered wall. So this is rock bottom, I thought. It is not a dramatic explosion. It is not a fiery crash. It is just cold, wet, and quiet. It is sitting on a plastic bench in a bus station, realizing that the man you loved is a thief and the family you served is an execution squad. But as I sat there shivering in the dark, a tiny spark ignited in the center of my chest. It was not hope. It was not faith. It was hate. Pure, cold, clarifying hate. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had left me with nothing. But they had forgotten one thing. You cannot break someone who has already been forged in fire. I opened my eyes and looked at the flickering departure board. I did not know where I was going yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I was not done. Not by a long shot. I stared at the cheap burner phone in my trembling hand. 10% battery remaining. It was a digital hourglass counting down the minutes until I was completely cut off from the world. I had one number left to call, one person who might still care about Viola the human being, not Viola the asset. My mother. Mama lived in an assisted living facility in Decatur. It was a nice place with manicured gardens and nurses who actually smiled. It was the kind of place that cost $5,000 a month. For years I had prided myself on providing that for her. But as my thumb hovered over the call button, a cold realization washed over me. I did not sign those checks. The King Family Trust did. Desmond did. I pressed call. The ringback tones sounded distorted and tinny in the empty station. One ring, two rings. Pick up, Mama. Please just pick up. Hello? Her voice was small, shaky. She sounded old, older than I remembered. Mama, it is me, Viola, I whispered, hunching over to shield the phone from the prying eyes of a security guard walking past. I am in trouble, Mama. Desmond fired me. Jamal took all the money. I am at the Greyhound station downtown. I have nowhere to go. Can I come to you? Just for a night, please. There was a long silence on the other end. A silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing my chest. I could hear her breathing a ragged, fearful sound. Viola, baby. she finally said, her voice cracking. He called me. Desmond called me 20 minutes ago. My blood ran cold. Of course he did. He was thorough. He was a general waging a war of annihilation. He said you stole from the company. She continued, the words tumbling out fast and panicked. He said you had a breakdown. He told me that if I help you, if I let you into my room, if I even send you $1, he will stop the payments. He will have me evicted by morning Viola. He said I would be on the street. I closed my eyes, tears leaking out hot and fast. He was holding my mother hostage. He was using a 72-year-old diabetic woman as leverage to make sure I stayed in the gutter. Mama, I did not steal anything, I choked out. They are lying. I believe you, baby, she sobbed. I know you. You are a good girl. But I am scared, Viola. I cannot live on the street. I am too old. I am sick. Please do not ask me to choose. Please. The desperation in her voice broke me. I could not do it. I could not ask her to sacrifice her safety for mine. I was 39. She was helpless. Desmond knew exactly what strings to pull to paralyze me. It is okay, Mama, I said, my voice dead. Do not worry. Stay safe. I will figure it out. Goodbye. I ended the call before she could say anything else. I could not bear to hear her apology. The screen on the phone dimmed, then went black. The battery was dead. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the bus station window. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. 39 years old. No husband, no job, no money, no family. I had spent 13 years building an empire for the kings. I had managed fleets of ships, navigated international trade wars, and solved million-dollar crises before breakfast. I had thought I was powerful. I had thought I was essential. But sitting there in the dirt and the cold, I realized the terrifying truth. I was nothing. I was a tenant in my own life. I had built my foundation on their land, and with one word they had evicted me. I was not just starting over. I was starting from below zero. I had wasted my youth, my fertility, and my brilliance on people who would let me freeze to death to save $1. I was white-knuckle terrified, but beneath the terror a new feeling was taking root. It was the absolute freedom of having nothing left to lose. I pulled my knees tighter to my chest, trying to disappear into the hard plastic seat of the bus station. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and floor cleaner. The noise was a constant low hum of coughing, snoring, and distant sirens. But one sound cut through the misery like a knife. Someone was crying. Not the angry drunk crying I had heard earlier, but the soft, broken weeping of someone who has run out of options. I turned my head. Sitting 3 seats away was a girl who looked like she had been chewed up and spit out by the city. She was young, maybe 19 years old. She wore oversized cargo pants covered in patches and a hoodie that had seen better days. Her face was a constellation of silver piercings in her nose, eyebrow, and lip, but under the metal and the grime she looked terrified. She was digging frantically through a battered canvas backpack, her hands shaking so hard she could barely work the zippers. I watched her for a moment. In my old life, I might have walked past her. I would have been too busy on a conference call or rushing to a client dinner to notice a teenager falling apart in a bus station. But tonight, I was not a busy executive. I was just another shipwreck on the shore. "Hey," I said, my voice raspy from the cold. "You okay?" The girl jumped her head, snapping up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wide with panic. She looked at my ruined evening gown and my wet hair, but she did not judge. She just saw another human being in pain. "I lost my wallet," she choked out, tears spilling over again. "My ID, my cash, everything. I just wanted to go home. I am stuck here. I cannot even call anyone because my phone died." I looked at her and I saw myself, stranded, broke, scared. The only difference was that she was 19 and I was 39. I knew how cruel the world could be. She was just learning. I reached for my phone case. My fingers felt stiff and clumsy as I pried off the back panel. There, folded into a tiny square, was a $20 bill. It was my emergency stash, my last lifeline. It was enough for a sandwich and maybe a cheap blanket from a drugstore. It was literally the only asset I had left in the world. I looked at the bill. Then I looked at the shivering girl. Desmond had taken my money, my job, and my pride. He had stripped me of my titles and my accounts. But he could not take my humanity. That was the one thing he could not freeze or confiscate. If I hoarded this $20, I was no better than him. I stood up, my legs aching, and walked over to the vending machines in the corner. I fed the crisp bill into the slot. The machine whirred and spat out change and 2 cups of steaming hot cocoa. They were watery and smelled like artificial sugar, but they were hot. "Here," I said, walking back and holding out one of the cups. "It is not much, but it is hot." The girl looked at the cup, then at me. Her eyes widened. "You do not have to do that," she whispered. "You look like you are having a bad night too." "I am having the worst night of my life," I admitted, sitting down next to her on the hard bench. "But that does not mean we have to freeze. Take it." She took the cup, wrapping her hands around it as if it were a nugget of gold. She took a sip and closed her eyes, a shudder running through her small frame. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I am Maya. I am Viola," I said, taking a sip of my own drink. The warmth hit my stomach, and I felt a tiny bit of tension leave my shoulders. We sat there in silence for a moment, 2 strangers at the bottom of the world sharing cheap cocoa. I did not know it then, but that $20 was the best investment I had ever made. I had just bought stock in my own salvation. Maya wrapped her hands around the styrofoam cup, warming her fingers. She took a tentative sip and then looked at me. Her dark eyes curious despite the red rims. "You look like you just walked off a movie set," she said, gesturing to my ruined gown. "A really sad movie." I laughed, a short, harsh sound. "It is a horror movie," I said. "And the monster won." "What happened?" she asked quietly. I do not know why I told her. Maybe it was the anonymity of the bus station, or maybe it was just the overwhelming need to say it out loud to confirm it was real. I told her everything. I told her about the 13 years of 60-hour weeks. I told her about missing my own sister's wedding because a shipment was stuck in customs. I told her about the New Year's Eve party, the public humiliation, and the way my husband had looked at his shoes while his father destroyed me. I did not sugarcoat it. I told her about the money Jamal stole, the threats against my mother, the absolute emptiness of my bank account. I laid my failure out on the bench between us like a dissection. "So they just erased you," Maya said, her voice filled with a quiet anger that surprised me. "Just like that. Because you turned 39. "Because I was expensive," I corrected. "And because Desmond King thinks loyalty is a one-way street. He thinks he bought me when I married his son. Now he is trading me in for a newer model." King, Maya repeated the name, her head tilting slightly. "King Logistics. The big blue trucks with the gold crown logo." "Yes," I said, looking down at my hands. "That is them. I built that network. When I started, they had 10 trucks and a leaky warehouse in Savannah. Now they are global. I designed the tracking software. I negotiated the fuel contracts. I hired the drivers. It was my life, Maya. And Ashley, that little girl he hired, she thinks logistics is about posting pictures of boxes. She is going to crash it into the ground in a month." Maya was staring at me now, her gaze intense and calculating. "Wait," she said, setting her cup down on the bench. "You are the one who fixed the port strike last year. The one who rerouted the medical supplies during the hurricane." I looked at her, surprised. "How do you know about that?" "That was industry news, not something a teenager would know." "My dad talks about business a lot," Maya said, waving a hand dismissively. "He is obsessed with supply chains. He always says that King Logistics is a house of cards held together by one brilliant operator. He said if that person ever left, the whole thing would collapse." She leaned closer, her piercings glinting under the fluorescent lights. "He said her name was Viola. Is that you? Are you the operator?" I felt a strange flush of pride amidst the shame. "Yes, I said, sitting up a little straighter. That is me. I am Viola. And yes, without me, that company is a disaster waiting to happen. But it does not matter now. I have been locked out. They took my access, my keys, my life. I am just a ghost, Maya. A broke, homeless ghost. Maya did not look at me with pity anymore. She looked at me like I was a puzzle piece she had been searching for. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone. It was sleek, expensive, the latest model, a stark contrast to her ragged clothes. I thought your phone was dead, I said, confused. It was, she said, tapping the screen. But I just remembered who I am, and who my dad is. She looked at me, a slow grin spreading across her face. You know, Viola, my dad has been trying to figure out how to beat Desmond King for 20 years. He calls him the old vulture. He says King steals ideas because he cannot have any of his own. She dialed a number and put the phone to her ear. I listened, the bus station noise fading into the background. Dad, she said into the phone, her voice changing, becoming confident, commanding. Do not yell. I know I ran away. I know you are worried. But shut up for a second and listen to me. She looked at me and winked. I am at the Greyhound station. No, I am not coming home. Well, not just me. I found something better than home, Dad. I found the weapon. She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. Yes, the weapon, she said. I am sitting next to Viola Davis. The Viola Davis, the one who runs King Logistics. Desmond fired her tonight, Dad. He threw her out on the street. Yes, I am sure. She is right here. And she is really, really pissed off. She held the phone out to me. He wants to talk to you. I took the phone, my hand shaking. Hello, I whispered. A deep, smooth voice answered, not angry. Not worried, just powerful. Ms. Davis, the voice said. My name is Elijah Vance. If half of what my daughter says is true, I think you and I are about to become very good friends. Stay right there. I am coming to get you. And bring your rage, Ms. Davis. We are going to need it. I handed the sleek phone back to Maya, my fingers numb not just from the cold, but from the shock of who was on the other end of the line. Elijah Vance, the wolf of West Midtown, the man Desmond King checked under his bed for at night. He was coming here, to a Greyhound station that smelled like bleach and bad choices. Maya slipped the phone into her oversized cargo pants and looked at me with a smirk that was equal parts rebellious teenager and shark. He is 10 minutes away, she said. He was already in the car leaving his own New Year's party. He said he would rather talk to you than the mayor. I sat back against the hard plastic bench, trying to process the shift in my reality. 10 minutes ago, I was destitute. Now I was waiting for a billionaire. I looked at Maya, really looked at her this time. Under the grunge aesthetic and the piercings, I saw the intelligence in her eyes. She was not just a runaway, she was a headhunter. Why, I asked, my voice quiet. Why help me? You could have just called him for money and left me here. Maya shrugged, pulling her knees up to her chin. Because I hate how they treat people, she said simply. I saw your face, Viola. I saw what they did to you. And I know my dad. He is ruthless, yes, but he respects talent. He hates wasted potential. And Desmond King just threw away his most valuable asset. I want to see the look on King's face when he realizes who picked it up. We waited in silence as the minutes ticked by. The station was thinning out, the late-night lull settling in. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past us, the wheels squeaking a lonely rhythm. Outside, the rain had turned into a deluge, battering against the glass doors. Then the atmosphere in the station changed. It was subtle at first. The security guard by the door straightened his spine. The few people waiting near the entrance stopped talking and looked outside. I turned my head. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw headlights. Not the yellow dim lights of a city bus or a taxi. These were crisp blue-white LEDs cutting through the gloom like lasers. A car pulled up to the curb, gliding silently as a predator. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom jet, black and massive, looking like a tank dressed in a tuxedo. It was so out of place in this crumbling part of town that it looked like a special effect. The back door opened before the car even came to a full stop. A man stepped out, ignoring the rain soaking his expensive suit. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of deep mahogany and a shaved head that gleamed under the streetlights. He held a large black umbrella, but he did not open it for himself. He walked straight toward the sliding doors of the station, his stride eating up the distance. Maya stood up, grabbing her battered backpack. "Showtime," she whispered. The doors slid open and Elijah Vance stepped into the bus station. The air seemed to shift around him, charged with electricity and money. He scanned the room, his eyes sharp and assessing, until they landed on us. He did not look at his daughter with anger. He looked at her with respect. Then he looked at me. He took in the ruined dress, the wet hair, the exhaustion etched into my face. But he did not sneer. He nodded once, a warrior acknowledging another warrior on the battlefield. "Ms. Davis." Elijah said, his voice deep and resonating in the quiet space. "I apologize for the delay. Traffic in Buckhead is murder on New Year's." I stood up, my legs shaky but my chin high. "Mr. Vance," I said, "you are a long way from your party." He smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that made me understand why Desmond feared him. "The party was boring," he said, "and I heard there was a much more interesting conversation happening down here." He gestured toward the open door of the Rolls-Royce, where the warm leather interior beckoned like a portal to another world. "Shall we?" he asked. "I believe we have an empire to dismantle." I looked at the bus station one last time, at the vending machine where I had spent my last $20. Then I looked at Elijah Vance. I stepped forward, leaving the wreckage of my old life on the dirty floor behind me. "Led the way," I said. Elijah Vance did not just walk, he occupied space. Even in the dim light of the bus station, he radiated the kind of power that made the air feel thinner. He stood 6'3" in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than my annual salary used to be. Raindrops glistened on his shaved head, but he ignored them, his focus entirely on the two women huddled on the plastic bench. He stopped in front of Maya. For a second, I thought he might scold her. She was his daughter, a billionaire heiress, dressed like a dumpster diver sitting in a Greyhound station. But his expression softened. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his large hand gentle. "You gave your mother a heart attack, Maya," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We thought you were in New York." "New York is boring," Maya shrugged, but she leaned into his touch just a little. "And I found something better here, Dad. I told you." Elijah turned his gaze to me. It was like being scanned by an X-ray machine. He took in the ruined dress, the mud on my hem, the exhaustion etched into my face. But unlike Desmond, who had looked at me with contempt, Elijah looked at me with something else entirely. Recognition. "Viola Davis," he said, testing the name on his tongue. "The woman who made the Savannah Port Authority rewrite their scheduling software just to accommodate her fleet. The woman who predicted the Suez blockage 3 weeks before it happened." I stood up, smoothing my dress with as much dignity as I could muster. "That was me," I said, my voice raspy. "Now I am just the woman who got fired at a New Year's Eve party." Elijah laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Fired? Desmond King fired you? That is not a business decision, Viola. That is suicide." He shook his head, looking past me at the rain-streaked window, as if he could see his rival somewhere in the dark. "I have been trying to buy King Logistics for 10 years, Elijah said, turning back to me. "Not for the trucks, not for the warehouses. I wanted it for the operating system. I wanted it for you." He stepped closer, the smell of expensive leather and rain surrounding him. "Desmond thinks he owns the ship's Viola, but you own the tide. He just threw away the only captain who knows how to navigate the storm, and he did it because he was afraid of your age. Because I was expired." I corrected him, the word still bitter on my tongue. "Expired," Elijah scoffed. Fine wine expires if you leave it out in the sun. Intelligence does not expire. Experience does not expire. Desmond is a fool, and tonight his foolishness is my fortune. He extended a hand, not to shake mine, but to offer support. Come with me, Viola. You are not done. You are just under new management. And I promise you this. In my house, we do not replace gold with plastic. I looked at his hand. It was a lifeline, a second chance, a weapon. I took it. Let us go, I said. Maya grabbed her backpack, grinning. I told you he would like you, she said. Now can we please go somewhere that does not smell like bleach? I am starving. Elijah ushered us toward the car, holding the umbrella high to shield me from the rain. As I slid into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, I looked back at the bus station one last time. I was leaving my old life behind, but I was taking my rage with me, and now I had a billionaire to help me aim it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a penthouse that felt more like a fortress in the sky than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Atlanta, the city lights shimmering through the heavy rain like scattered diamonds. The air smelled of white tea and expensive leather, a sharp contrast to the diesel fumes and bleach of the bus station I had just left. Maya immediately disappeared into the kitchen, her combat boots squeaking on the polished marble floors. Elijah turned to me, his expression unreadable. The guest suite is down the hall to the right, he said. My sister keeps some clothes here. You should be about the same size. Take your time, Viola. Wash off the night. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door, leaning back against the cool wood for a moment to catch my breath. I peeled off the ruined black evening gown, the silk heavy with mud and rainwater. It fell to the floor with a wet slap, a pile of expensive failure. I stepped into the shower and turned the water as hot as I could stand. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the feeling of the Greyhound bench, the cold rain, and the humiliation of Desmond's laughter. When I stepped out, I found a cream cashmere sweater and soft trousers in the closet. They were elegant, understated, and warm. I dressed slowly, looking at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the wet, shivering victim from the bus station. Her eyes were hard, her jaw was set. The fire Desmond had ignited in my chest had not been extinguished by the water. It was burning hotter. I walked back out to the living area. Elijah was standing by the window holding a tumbler of amber liquid. He turned when I entered, his eyes assessing me with that same respectful intensity. You look like you are ready for a board meeting, he said, handing me a glass of water. I am ready for a war, I corrected, taking the glass. Elijah chuckled and sat down on a leather sofa, motioning for me to take the armchair opposite him. I like that answer, because that is exactly what I am proposing. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Desmond King made a fatal error tonight. He thinks he fired an employee. He thinks he cut a cost. But he forgot that you are not just a manager, Viola. You are the architect. You carry the blueprints of his entire empire in your head. I took a sip of water, the coolness soothing my throat. It does not matter, I said, my voice flat. I signed a non-compete clause 7 years ago. If I work for you, if I even consult for you, he will sue us both into the ground. He has the lawyers to do it. Elijah waved a hand dismissively, as if the threat of a lawsuit was nothing more than a fly to be swatted away. Non-competes are for employees, Viola. I am not offering you a job. I do not need a VP of operations. I have plenty of people who can follow orders. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper, sliding it across the coffee table toward me. I am not looking for a hire, he said, his voice dropping to a serious rumble. I am looking for a co-founder. I am launching a new venture. A boutique logistics firm specialized in high-value, time-sensitive cargo. The kind of white-glove service Desmond is too cheap and too slow to provide. He tapped the paper with a manicured finger. That is a partnership agreement. 20% equity, full operational control, your name on the letterhead next to mine. You do not work for me, Viola. You work with me. We are not breaking your non-compete because you are not taking a salary. You are taking ownership. I stared at the document, the numbers swimming before my eyes. 20%. That was potentially millions of dollars. Desmond had never given me a single share of stock in 13 years. He had called me family to avoid paying me what I was worth. Elijah was offering me a kingdom before I had even dried my hair. Why, I asked, looking up at him. Why give away 20% of a company to a woman you just found in a bus station? Elijah smiled a slow, predatory grin that told me exactly what kind of game we were playing. Because I know what hate can do, Viola. It is the most powerful fuel on earth. And right now you have enough fuel to burn Desmond King to the ground. I just want to be the one who hands you the match. I stared at the contract on the coffee table, the numbers blurring slightly under the warm, recessed lighting of the penthouse. 20%. It was a fortune. It was revenge wrapped in a legal document. But my hand hovered over the paper, trembling. I thought about the drivers I had hired, men and women with mortgages and braces to pay for. I thought about the warehouse shift supervisors who texted me photos of their new grandchildren. If I signed this, if I helped Elijah Vance launch a direct attack on King Logistics, I would not just be hurting Desmond. I would be nuking the livelihoods of hundreds of people who had been loyal to me. I cannot do it, Elijah, I whispered, pulling my hand back. I want to see Desmond suffer, God knows I do. But I built that company. Those are my people. If we go to war, innocent people are going to lose their jobs. I cannot be the reason a single mother in distribution loses her health care. I have to be better than him. I have to keep my integrity. Elijah did not look disappointed. He looked sad. He stood up and walked over to a sleek black credenza, pulling out a thick file folder. He placed it gently on the table in front of me next to the contract. I admire your loyalty, Viola, he said, his voice low and grave. It is rare, but you are being loyal to a corpse. Desmond King killed your relationship with that company long before tonight. You just did not know you were dead yet. He tapped the folder with a manicured finger. Open it. Read the dates. I hesitated, then flipped open the cover. The first document was a patent filing with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. It was for a predictive shipping algorithm. My algorithm. The one I had spent 3 years developing, the one that used historical weather patterns to reroute perishable cargo. It was the crown jewel of my career, the reason our spoilage rates were the lowest in the industry. My eyes scanned down the page looking for the inventor credit. I expected to see King Logistics, or maybe even Desmond King. Inventor Ashley King. I gasped, the sound sharp in the quiet room. I flipped the page. A copyright registration for the Standard Operating Procedures Manual I had written from scratch. Author Ashley King. I flipped again. A trademark application for the branding of a new sustainable shipping initiative I had pitched in October. Owner Ashley King. I looked at the dates stamped on the filings. October 14th, November 2nd, December 10th. They had been doing this for months. While I was working 18-hour days to ensure the holiday shipments arrived on time, Desmond was systematically stripping my name from my own creations. He was legally transferring my intellect, my experience, my very soul to a 24-year-old girl who thought logistics was a type of yoga. He did not just fire you tonight, Viola, Elijah said, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. He erased you. He stole your legacy and handed it to her as a wedding present. He knew you would never sue him because you are family. He counted on your ethics. He weaponized your integrity against you. I stared at Ashley's name. Ashley King. Inventor. Author. Visionary. The girl who had asked me last week if Italy was in Europe. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a bridge collapsing. The bridge that connected me to my conscience, to my worry for the innocent, to my hesitation. It was gone. Desmond King had not just stolen my job. He had stolen my mind. He had plagiarized my life. And Jamal, my husband, had watched him do it. He had probably notarized the documents. I looked up at Elijah. The tears were gone. The exhaustion was gone. There was only a cold, crystalline clarity. "Where do I sign?" I asked. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen Elijah offered. The weight of it felt good in my hand, solid and real. My signature flowed onto the lines, smooth and final. V. Davis. I did not sign Viola King. I did not sign Mrs. Jamal King. I signed the name I had been born with, the name I would rebuild an empire on. With that ink, I severed the last tie. I was no longer a daughter-in-law. I was no longer a loyal employee. I was a competitor, and I was going to be the most dangerous kind of competitor. The kind who knew where all the bodies were buried because I had dug the graves myself. Elijah picked up the contract and slipped it into a leather folder. "Welcome to the team, partner," he said, extending his hand. I shook it, my grip firm. "Thank you, Elijah. But let us be clear on the objective here. I do not just want to take their market share. I do not just want to poach their best clients." I stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the city. Somewhere down there in the rain, Desmond King was probably toasting to his brilliance, unaware that he had just armed a nuclear warhead. "I want to teach them a lesson about logistics," I said, my reflection staring back at me, hard and unforgiving. "They think logistics is just moving boxes from point A to point B. They think it is about trucks and ships and fuel costs." I turned back to Elijah. "But you and I know the truth. Logistics is about connections. It is about the delicate, invisible web that holds the world together. A supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link." I walked over to the credenza and picked up a crystal decanter of whiskey, pouring myself a generous measure. "Desmond thinks I was just a cog in his machine. He thinks he can replace me with a shiny new part, and the engine will keep running." I took a sip, the burn of the alcohol matching the fire in my gut. "But he forgot that I am not a cog, Elijah. I am the oil. I am the grease that kept the gears from grinding themselves into dust. I am the one who smoothed over the friction between the vendors and the accounts payable department. I am the one who remembered the portmaster's anniversary so our containers got priority clearance. I am the one who kept the whole damn thing from overheating." I set the glass down with a sharp click. When you remove the oil, the machine does not just stop working. It seizes, it overheats, it destroys itself from the inside out. I looked at Elijah, my eyes blazing. "That is what I am going to do to King Logistics. I am not going to attack them from the outside. I am going to let them destroy themselves from the inside. I am going to let Ashley make her mistakes. I am going to let Jamal fumble the contracts. And when the friction starts, when the heat builds up, when the whole thing starts to smoke and scream, I will be standing right there with the fire extinguisher, and I will not use it." I smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. One broken link can destroy an entire supply chain. Desmond King just broke the most important link he had. Now let us watch the whole chain shatter. Elijah raised his glass to me, his eyes shining with respect. "To shattered chains," he said. "To broken links," I replied. "And to the new management." The next morning I walked into Elijah's company headquarters, not as a visitor, but as a general surveying her new command center. Vance Global was sleek, modern, and buzzing with efficiency, but I was not interested in the glass-walled conference rooms or the ergonomic chairs. I needed soldiers. I sat down in my temporary office, a corner suite with a view that made Desmond's mansion look like a dollhouse. I pulled out my personal phone and started scrolling through my contacts. Not the executives, not the vendors. I was looking for the people who actually made the world move. First on my list was Marcus. He was 55 years old, black, and had been the head of the dispatch team at King Logistics for 20 years. He knew every truck driver by name, every back road from Atlanta to Miami, and could smell a delayed shipment before it even left the warehouse. Ashley had fired him 2 weeks ago because he refused to wear the new neon pink company polo shirts she had designed. She said he did not fit the vibe. I dialed his number. Marcus picked up on the second ring, his voice tired. Hello, Marcus, it is Viola. Marcus, it is. There was a pause, then a warmth filled his voice. Ms. Viola, I heard about last night. I am so sorry. That man is a fool. He is worse than a fool, Marcus, I said, leaning back in my chair. He is a thief, and I am about to get everything back. But I cannot do it alone. I need a dispatch manager, someone who knows the difference between a refrigerated truck and a toaster oven. Marcus laughed, a deep, rich sound. I might know a guy, but he is old, and he does not like pink shirts. I smiled. Pink is banned in this office, Marcus, and old is just another word for experienced. Can you be here in an hour? I was already putting on my coat, Miss Viola. Next, I called Sarah. She was 60, a grandmother of 5, and the best customs broker in the state. She could clear a shipment of hazardous chemicals through customs in under an hour while knitting a sweater. Ashley had let her go because Sarah worked from home 2 days a week to watch her grandkids. Ashley had called it a lack of commitment. Sarah, I said when she answered, how would you like to clear some cargo for a company that actually pays you what you are worth? Honey, Sarah said, her voice sharp as a tack. If it means I get to beat Desmond King at his own game, I will work for free. By noon, my office was filled with the cast-offs, the rejects, the expired. There was David, the warehouse foreman, who had been fired for having gray hair. There was Elena, the logistics coordinator, who had been let go because she refused to download TikTok. There was a room full of people with decades of experience, people who had built King Logistics with their sweat and their brilliance, only to be discarded like trash. I stood at the head of the conference table looking at their faces. They were tired. They were hurt. But underneath the pain, I saw the same fire that was burning in me. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice ringing with authority, Desmond King thinks we are the past. He thinks we are obsolete. He thinks he can replace us with apps and influencers. I looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. But he forgot one thing. Apps crash. Influencers get bored. But we endure. We solve problems. We move mountains. And starting today, we are going to show him exactly what the past can do to his future. A murmur of agreement went around the table, growing into a roar of approval. Welcome to Vance Global, I said, smiling a shark-like smile. Let us get to work. We have an empire to steal. I sat at my new desk, the leather soft beneath my fingers. It was time to launch the White Glove Initiative. Desmond King built his fortune on volume. He moved millions of tons of cheap plastic and fast fashion, and he did it by cutting every corner imaginable. But in his obsession with scale, he had forgotten about precision. He had forgotten that there are some things you cannot afford to lose, some things you cannot afford to delay. I pulled up the contact list I had rebuilt from memory. It was not on a server. It was in my head. I knew exactly who to call. I dialed the number for Jean-Luc, the head of logistics for a major French pharmaceutical company. He had been a client of King's for 5 years, but lately he had been complaining about temperature variances in his shipments. Bonjour, Jean-Luc, I said when he answered, my voice warm and confident. It is Viola. Viola, there was a pause, then a rush of relief. Mon Dieu, we heard you left. It has been chaos. The new contact Ashley, she sent me a TikTok when I asked for a temperature log. A TikTok, Viola. I smiled. That sounds frustrating, Jean-Luc. But I am not calling to gossip. I am calling to offer you a solution. I have started a new division at Vance Global. We call it White Glove. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a confidential pitch. No call centers. No tracking numbers that do not work. You get my personal cell phone number. You get 24/7 satellite monitoring of every single pallet. And most importantly, you get drivers who know that if the temperature goes above 2 degrees Celsius, the shipment is ruined. Jean-Luc sighed, a sound of pure longing. But the cost, Viola. King is cheap. King is cheap because he does not care if your insulin arrives spoiled, I countered. What is the cost of a recalled shipment, Jean-Luc? What is the cost of your reputation? I am not offering you the cheapest ride. I am offering you the safest. I am offering you a guarantee. I could hear him calculating. He knew I was right. He knew that one bad shipment could cost him his job. "Send me the contract," he said finally. "If you can guarantee the cold chain, I do not care what it costs." I hung up and immediately dialed the next number. Sarah, the operations director for a luxury handbag distributor. Her inventory was currently sitting in a damp warehouse in New Jersey because Ashley had forgotten to file the insurance paperwork. "Sarah," I said, cutting straight to the chase. "I know your spring collection is hostage in Jersey. I can have a truck there in 2 hours. A clean truck, a secure truck, and I have a customs broker who owes me a favor. We can have those bags in your boutique by Friday." "Viola?" Sarah gasped. "You are a lifesaver. Desmond told me it would be 2 weeks. He said mold was a natural risk of shipping." "Mold is a sign of incompetence," I said. "I will send the paperwork." I spent the next 6 hours making call after call. I targeted the clients Desmond took for granted, the ones with high stakes and low tolerance for failure. I used every birthday I had remembered, every favor I had banked, every moment of trust I had built over 13 years. I did not have to sell them on Vance Global. I just had to sell them on me. By the time the sun went down, I had stolen 5 of King's most lucrative accounts. I had not just taken their business, I had taken their peace of mind. Desmond King was playing checkers with shipping containers. I was playing chess with the global economy, and I had just taken his knights. I stared at the contract on my screen, the cursor blinking on the signature line. It was the vaccine distribution agreement for the Southeast region. This was not just a shipping contract, it was a lifeline for millions of people. It required temperature-controlled trucks, real-time GPS tracking, and security clearance that took months to acquire. King Logistics had held this contract for 5 years, but they had been complacent. They had started subcontracting the last-mile delivery to unmarked vans to save money. I picked up my phone and called Dr. Evans, the head of procurement for the regional health network. He was a man who valued precision over price. "Dr. Evans, it is Viola," I said, my voice calm and professional. "I am calling to let you know that Vance Global is ready to take over the vaccine distribution. We have a fleet of new refrigerated trucks on standby. We have drivers who are vetted and trained in handling medical cargo, and we have a guarantee. If a single vial is compromised, you do not pay for the shipment, and we replace it within 6 hours." There was a silence on the line. Then Dr. Evans sighed. "Viola, you know we have a contract with King." "I know, Dr. Evans. But I also know that last month, a shipment was left on a loading dock in Macon for 4 hours because the driver took a lunch break. I know you lost $50,000 worth of product, and I know Desmond King told you it was a clerical error." Dr. Evans made a noise of frustration. "That was a disaster," he admitted. "But breaking a contract is messy." "Not as messy as a spoiled vaccine reaching a patient," I said quietly. "I have the paperwork ready. All you have to do is sign. We can start deliveries on Monday." 2 hours later, the signed contract landed in my inbox. It was done. I had just taken one of Desmond's most prestigious accounts. It was not the biggest in terms of revenue, but it was the most critical in terms of reputation. Losing the vaccine contract was a signal to the entire industry. It said that King Logistics could no longer be trusted with the things that mattered. Across town, in his mahogany-paneled office, Desmond King was pouring himself a drink. His phone buzzed with a notification from his legal team. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the message. "Notice of termination, Southeast Regional Health Network, effective immediately." Desmond laughed a dry, humorless sound. He tossed the phone onto his desk and took a sip of his scotch. Panic over nothing, he muttered to the empty room. "She got lucky. A dog catches a fly every now and then. Let her have the vaccines. It is a high-maintenance, low-margin headache anyway." Ashley focused on the fashion retailers. That is where the real money is. He did not see the cracks forming in his foundation. He did not see that by losing the medical contract, he had just lost his security clearance for 3 other government bids. He thought it was a minor annoyance. He did not realize it was the first domino, and I was already lining up the second one. While I was busy securing the integrity of the regional vaccine supply chain, Ashley King was busy securing the perfect lighting for her morning vlog. The transformation of King Logistics from a military-grade operation into a content creation house happened with terrifying speed. Desmond had given her the keys to the kingdom, and she was using them to redecorate the dungeon. I received the intel from Marcus, who still had friends on the inside. He sent me photos that made my blood run cold and my lips twitch with dark amusement. The command center, a room I had designed for maximum efficiency with wall-to-wall monitors tracking global shipping lanes, had been gutted. The ergonomic chairs where my dispatchers sat for 12-hour shifts were gone. In their place sat velvet beanbag chairs and low coffee tables made of reclaimed wood. The monitors were replaced with ring lights and tripods. Ashley had decided that a war room was too aggressive. She wanted a vibe. But the office renovation was just the appetizer. The main course of disaster was served in the warehouse. The King Logistics Distribution Hub was a massive facility spanning 400,000 square feet. It ran on a system of universal color codes that I had implemented a decade ago. Red meant urgent or hazardous. Blue meant refrigerated. Yellow meant hold for inspection. It was a language that every forklift driver and packer understood instantly. It was a language that kept people safe and cargo moving. Ashley walked onto the warehouse floor on a Tuesday morning wearing open-toed stilettos and holding a color swatch book. She looked at the sea of red and yellow tags and wrinkled her nose in disgust. "This energy is all wrong," she announced to the shift supervisor, a man who had been moving freight since before she was born. "Red is so angry. It screams anxiety. And yellow is just tacky. It clashes with the new branding. We need to shift the vibration of the warehouse. We need to invite abundance." She opened her swatch book and pointed to a pale, washed-out green. "Sage," she declared. "We are replacing red with sage. It represents growth and tranquility. And instead of blue, let us go with sky. It is more optimistic. And for the hazard tags, let us use blush. It is much more welcoming than that awful neon orange." The supervisor tried to explain. He tried to tell her that sage looked exactly like the gray concrete floor under bad lighting. He tried to tell her that blush was not a color that signaled danger to a man driving a 5-ton machine. But Ashley waved him off. "Do not be a blockage to the flow," she scolded him, while her assistant filmed the interaction. "We are disrupting the industry. Get the paint." By Wednesday morning, the chaos was absolute. The veteran staff stared at the new pastel tags in confusion. A pallet of lithium-ion batteries, which should have been marked with a screaming red hazard tag, was labeled with a calming sage sticker. It was placed next to a shipment of cotton sheets because the colors looked cute together. The drivers could not find the priority shipments because everything was color-coded to match a mood board instead of a delivery schedule. Forklifts idled in the aisles while operators argued over whether a box was sky or ocean. Arguments broke out, schedules slipped. And in the middle of it all, Ashley was dancing in front of a wall of misplaced inventory, filming a TikTok about how she was bringing feminine energy to the male-dominated world of supply chain management. I watched the video on my phone in my new office at Vance Global. I watched her twirl in front of a pallet that I knew contained flammable solvents, which was sitting dangerously close to a heat vent. "She is not disrupting the industry," I said to Elijah, who was watching over my shoulder. "She is color-coding a catastrophe. Let her paint." Elijah said, his voice grim. "She is just making the target bigger." Marcus walked into my office, his face a mixture of horror and delight, holding up his tablet. "You need to see this, Ms. Viola," he said. "It is the Miami port feed. The shipment for the Taste of Summer Festival just hit the wall." I stood up and looked at the screen. It was a disaster in high definition. A 40-foot refrigerated container sat isolated in the customs inspection area, surrounded by agents in high-visibility vests. I knew exactly what was inside. $2 million worth of live Maine lobsters. It was a contract I had negotiated 3 years ago, a delicate dance of timing and temperature that required absolute precision. "What happened?" I asked, though. I already suspected the answer. Marcus shook his head. Ashley. She personally took over the account because she wanted to design the packaging. She said the old crates looked too industrial, but she did not just change the boxes. She changed the classification codes. I leaned closer to the screen. The customs agents were arguing with a frantic-looking man in a King Logistics polo shirt. The broker told me everything. Marcus continued. When the container arrived, the FDA inspector asked for the shellfish safety certification and the prior notice for food imports. The paperwork was missing. All of it. I closed my eyes, rubbing my temples. Let me guess. She did not know she needed it. Worse, Marcus said. She told the customs officer that she did not file food permits because the lobsters were currently alive. She argued that they were not food yet. She filed them under live animal transport, like they were poodles or circus elephants. She thought she was being clever, avoiding the FDA tariffs. She told the federal agent that until they hit the boiling water, they were technically pets. I stared at him. She called $2 million of crustacean livestock pets. The customs agent did not find it cute. He impounded the entire load for misclassification and potential health violations. And because she used the wrong code, the container was not plugged into the priority power grid. The aeration pumps are running on battery backup. I looked at the time. Those batteries lasted 4 hours. They had been sitting there for 3. They are suffocating, I said, my voice quiet. In an hour, that container will not be a shipment of luxury food. It will be a biohazard. When lobsters die in a confined space, they release ammonia. It is a chain reaction. One dies, and it poisons the water for the rest. It is going to turn into a $2 million tomb of rotting meat. The phone on my desk rang. It was Jean-Luc, the pharmaceutical client I had poached the day before. He had heard the rumor. Viola, he said, his voice hushed. Is it true? Did the King girl really try to import seafood as companion animals? It is true, Jean-Luc, I said, watching the screen as the first customs agent recoiled from the container door, covering his nose. The smell was starting to leak out. Desmond is going to lose his bond license over this, Jean-Luc whispered. That is negligence. It is not just negligence, I said, watching the disaster unfold. It is arrogance. She thought the rules were just suggestions. She thought she could vibe check the federal government. On the screen, a hazmat team was arriving. The lobsters were dead. The contract was dead. And the stench of failure was about to drift all the way back to Atlanta. Ashley had wanted to make a splash in the industry. Well, she had certainly done that. She had just created the most expensive compost heap in the history of the Port of Miami. I watched the screen of my tablet as the notification popped up. Ashley King is live. The title of the stream was Heartbroken. The universe is testing me. She was standing in the parking lot of the Miami port. The wind was whipping her hair across her face, and her mascara was running in perfect cinematic streaks. She had applied a filter that made her tears glitter like diamonds. Hey guys, she sobbed into the camera, holding the phone with a shaky hand. I am literally shaking right now. You would not believe the hate I am receiving. The energy at this port is so toxic. It is honestly unsafe for empaths. She pointed the camera toward the customs building where serious men in uniforms were currently filing paperwork to fine King Logistics into oblivion. Those officers, she whispered loud enough for the microphone to pick up. They are targeting me. They saw a young woman trying to disrupt a stale industry and they decided to shut me down. It is discrimination. They do not like my vibe. They do not like that I am bringing feminine energy to their boys' club. They literally called my lobsters a biohazard. Can you believe that? It is seafood. It is natural. It is from the earth. I scrolled through the comments. Usually her feed was an echo chamber of praise and heart emojis, but today the tide had turned. The internet does not forgive incompetence, especially when it smells like rotting shellfish. One comment read, "Did you just kill $2 million of food because you forgot the paperwork?" Another said, "This is not discrimination, honey, this is the FDA." Another simply posted a graph of King Logistics stock price with a downward arrow. Ashley wiped her nose on her sleeve. forgetting her glamorous persona for a second. And honestly, I think this is because Mercury is in retrograde, she continued, sniffing. The communication lines are blocked. The universe is telling me that I need to slow down and focus on self-care. So I am going to take a mental health week, you guys. I cannot deal with this negativity. Marcus stood beside me watching the train wreck unfold. He held up his phone showing the real-time stock ticker for King Logistics. It was a red line falling off a cliff. It had dropped 12% in 10 minutes. She is blaming the planets, Marcus said, his voice full of wonder. She just cost the company $5 million in fines and lost product, and she is blaming a planet. She is not just blaming the planets, I said, watching, as Ashley ended the stream with a peace sign and a promise to link her outfit details later. She is blaming everyone but herself. And the market is watching. Desmond wanted visibility. He wanted to go viral. Well, he got his wish. The whole world is watching his chosen successor have a meltdown over dead crustaceans. Elijah walked in looking at the screen where the replay was already looping. The news channels were picking it up. Lobstergate was trending. You know, Elijah said, loosening his tie. I almost feel bad for Desmond. Almost. He spent 40 years building a reputation for reliability, and his daughter-in-law just flushed it down the toilet in a 3-minute video. I turned off the tablet, the image of Ashley's glittering tears fading to black. Do not feel bad, I said. He chose the packaging over the product. Now he has to pay for the spoil. The command center was in meltdown mode. The red warning lights on the server banks were flashing in a rhythmic strobe that induced nothing but panic. Phones were ringing off the hook, a cacophony of angry clients and terrified vendors, demanding answers no one in that room had. In the middle of the storm, Jamal sat at my old desk, his face slick with sweat. He looked like a pilot trying to fly a plane after the engines had already fallen off. Desmond was pacing behind him, barking orders that made no sense. Override the system, Jamal. Get the manifests. Call the governor. Fix this. I am trying. Dad. Jamal shouted back, his voice cracking under the pressure. I am trying to access the back end. I need to redirect the other shipments before the FDA flags the entire fleet. He typed frantically on the keyboard, his fingers stumbling over the keys. He entered the admin password, the one we had used for 5 years. King Empire 1. Access denied. He tried again, thinking he might have made a typo. King Empire 1. Access denied. He tried a variation. King Logistics 2024. Access denied. System lockdown imminent. Jamal stared at the screen. His hands were shaking. He looked at the IT director, a young man named Kevin, who looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk and disappear. Kevin, what is going on? Jamal demanded. Why is my login not working? Ms. Viola changed the admin protocols on New Year's Eve, Kevin whispered. Before she left the building, she said it was a security update. She reset the master key, reset it to what Desmond roared. Only she knows, Kevin said, shrinking back. But there is a password recovery option. It is a security question. Jamal clicked the link. The screen refreshed. A single line of text appeared in the center of the black monitor. It was not a standard question like mother's maiden name or name of first pet. It was custom written. Security question. What is the exact date we met? Jamal froze. He stared at the question. The cursor blinked, taunting him. The exact date. Not the year, not the month. The date. He racked his brain. It was 15 years ago. It was spring. Or maybe late winter. They had met at a mixer for young professionals. He remembered she was wearing a blue dress. He remembered thinking she was the smartest person in the room. But the date. He typed April 15th, 2009. Incorrect. He tried again. May 20th, 2009. Incorrect. One attempt remaining before total system wipe. He pulled his hands away from the keyboard as if it were red hot. A total wipe. If he guessed wrong again, the system would erase the encryption keys. The data would be lost forever. The client lists the shipping routes, the billing records, everything. He looked at Desmond. Dad, I do not know it. What do you mean you do not know it? Desmond shouted, his face turning purple. It is your wife. How do you not know when you met your wife? I do not know. Jamal screamed back, the panic finally breaking through his facade. I do not remember. It was a long time ago. I never thought I would need to know it to save the company. He slumped back in the chair, defeated by a simple question about his own life. He realized then that Viola had not just locked the system, she had booby-trapped it with his own indifference. She knew he would not remember. She knew he had spent the last decade taking her for granted, forgetting the milestones, letting the anniversaries slide by with generic gifts bought by his secretary. She had turned his lack of love into a weapon, and now it was pointed right at the heart of the family business. Call her, Desmond hissed. Call her and get the answer. Beg if you have to. Just get us back online. Jamal picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over my name. He looked sick. He knew that making that call was not just admitting defeat. It was admitting that he had failed the only test that really mattered. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk in my new office at Vance Global. The screen lit up with a photo I had taken years ago, a picture of Jamal smiling on a beach in Jamaica. Now that smile looked like a lie. I watched it ring for a moment, contemplating letting it go to voicemail. But I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the panic. I picked up the phone. Hello, Jamal? I said, my voice cool and detached. Viola, baby. Thank God you answered. His voice was a high-pitched whine, a frequency of desperation I had never heard before. Listen, you need to help me. Dad is going crazy over here. He is throwing chairs, Viola. Literally throwing chairs at the wall. The FDA is on line 1, and the Port Authority is on line 2, and we cannot access anything. I swiveled my ergonomic chair around to look at the view of the city. The rain had stopped, leaving the sky scrubbed clean and bright. That sounds like an operational problem, Jamal. I do not work in operations anymore. Remember, I am expired. No, Viola, listen. Do not hang up. It is the system. The main server. It is locked down. We cannot dispatch the trucks. We cannot print the labels. We have perishable goods sitting on the dock, and the system is asking for a security answer. He paused, taking a jagged breath. It is asking for the date we met. I tried our anniversary. I tried the date of our engagement. I tried your birthday. It is locking me out, Viola. It says one more wrong attempt, and it wipes the encryption keys. You have to tell me. What is the answer? I closed my eyes, savoring the silence on the line. He did not know. He honestly did not know. The man I had dedicated 15 years of my life to could not remember the single most important day of our history together. Look, just tell me the password and come home. Jamal rushed on, not waiting for an answer. We can fix this. I talked to Dad. He is willing to take you back. I raised an eyebrow even though he could not see me. Is he? Yes. Not as COO. Obviously, Ashley still has the title and the office. We cannot embarrass her publicly, but you can come back as a consultant. You can help her. She needs a mentor, Viola. You can be her assistant until she gets the hang of things. He lowered his voice as if he were offering me a precious gift. And I will make her apologize. I promise. She will do a whole Instagram story about it. She will tag you and everything. She will say she respects her elders and that she is learning so much from you. Is that not what you want? An apology. Just come back and fix the computers, baby. Please, before Dad has a stroke. The audacity took my breath away. He was offering me a demotion and a social media shout-out as compensation for destroying my life. He thought my dignity could be bought with an Instagram tag. He thought I was just sitting by the phone, waiting to be summoned back to serve them. He did not realize that I was not a servant anymore. I was the executioner. and he had just placed his head on the block. I listened to Jamal's frantic bargaining, his voice thin and reedy coming through the speaker. He was offering me scraps from the table I had built. He was offering me an apology on social media as if that could erase the humiliation of being discarded like a piece of broken furniture. He truly believed that I was desperate enough to accept a demotion just to be close to the family name again. An assistant, I repeated, my voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze mercury. You want me to come back and be an assistant to a girl who thinks a bill of lading is a horoscope? You want me to teach her how to do the job you stole from me so she can take the credit? Viola. Please, Jamal stammered. It is a title. Just for now. We will fix it later. Just tell me the answer. The screen is timing out. I have 30 seconds. I looked at the view of the skyline, the buildings standing tall and unshakable against the horizon. I realized then that I did not hate Jamal. Hate required energy. Hate implied that he still had the power to hurt me. I felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. He was a man who had never had to work for anything, and now when the bill was due, he had empty pockets. The security question is not a trick, Jamal, I said, speaking slowly and clearly so he would not miss a word. It is exactly what it says. The date we first met. I waited. I could hear him breathing hard, could hear the sound of his fingers hovering over the keyboard. I know that, Jamal cried out. It was 2009. It was the spring. I typed that. It was not the spring, I said, closing my eyes as the memory washed over me. It was October 14th. It was raining. You were standing outside the library without an umbrella, looking miserable. I invited you under mine. You told me I saved you from drowning. You looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. I opened my eyes. I remembered the scent of the rain. I remembered the color of his tie. I remembered the exact moment I decided to trust him with my heart. That was the most important day of my life, Jamal, I whispered. It was the day I chose you. And you do not even remember the month. Viola, wait! He screamed, the panic rising in his throat. October 14th. I am typing it. Wait, do not hang up. It is too late, Jamal, I said. You had 3 chances. You had 15 years to memorize that date. You had 15 years to show me that I mattered. You failed the test a long time ago. But the company, he pleaded. The legacy. The legacy is gone, I said, my voice hard as stone. You do not remember the answer, do you? Goodbye, Jamal. I tapped the red icon on my screen, ending the call. The silence that filled the office was heavy and absolute. On the other side of the city, in the chaos of the command center, Jamal stared at his phone, his face draining of blood. He looked at the computer screen. The cursor was still blinking in the answer field. He reached out his shaking finger to type the date I had just given him. October 14th. He pressed enter. For a second, nothing happened. Then the screen turned a bright, violent red. A message appeared in bold black letters. Timeout exceeded. Security protocol activated. System wipe initiated. No, Jamal whispered, watching in horror. A progress bar appeared on the screen, moving terrifyingly fast. Files began to vanish. The client database, deleted. The shipping manifests, deleted. The financial records for the last decade, deleted. Desmond King came rushing over, his face purple with rage. Did she give it to you? Did you fix it? Jamal could not speak. He could only point at the screen as the progress bar hit 100%. The screen went black. Then a single word appeared in the center of the monitor in green text. Expired. The hum of the servers died down. The lights on the modem banks went dark. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to get louder in the sudden dead silence of the room. The entire digital brain of King Logistics had just been lobotomized, and it was all because a husband could not remember the day he met his wife. The silence in the server room at King Logistics was louder than any alarm. The hum of the cooling fans was gone. The blinking lights were dark. It was a digital graveyard. Desmond King stood in the center of the room, staring at the black monitors that used to hold his empire. He was not screaming anymore. He had passed the point of blind rage and entered the cold, calculated territory of total war. He turned to Jamal, who was still weeping softly in the corner, and looked at him with pure disgust. "Stop crying," Desmond said, his voice ice cold. "Tears do not fix servers. Lawyers do." Desmond returned to his office and made one phone call. He did not call a repair technician. He called Arthur Sterling. Sterling was not just a lawyer, he was a weapon. He was the kind of man you hired when you did not just want to win a case, you wanted to destroy the defendant's life. He was the most expensive litigator in Atlanta, a man with silver hair, a bespoke suit, and a reputation for grinding his opponents into dust. An hour later, Sterling sat across from Desmond, his briefcase open. He listened to the story of the wiped servers, the lost data, and the security question. He did not look shocked, he looked hungry. "She was an employee," Sterling said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "She destroyed corporate property. She violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. She breached her fiduciary duty. And since she is now working for a direct competitor, we can add corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets to the list. We will not just sue her for damages, Desmond. We will seek criminal charges. We will freeze her assets again. We will bury her under so much paperwork and legal fees that she will not be able to breathe." Desmond nodded, a cruel smile touching his lips. "I do not just want her bankrupt, Sterling. I want her broken. I want her to regret the day she ever learned the word logistics." Across town at Vance Global, I was in the middle of a strategy meeting with the new dispatch team when the receptionist knocked on the glass door. She looked nervous. "Ms. Davis," she said, "there is a process server here to see you." I stood up. The room went quiet. I walked out to the lobby where a man in a cheap windbreaker was waiting. He handed me a thick envelope heavy with the weight of Desmond's hate. "Viola Davis," he asked. "You have been served." I took the envelope. I did not open it immediately. I walked back into the conference room and placed it on the table. Elijah looked at it, then at me. "Sterling," he asked, knowing Desmond's playbook as well as I did. "Sterling," I confirmed. I opened the folder. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of fiction. It accused me of everything from malicious data destruction to stealing proprietary algorithms. It claimed damages in the amount of $50 million. It demanded an immediate injunction to stop me from working in the logistics industry. It was designed to terrify me. It was designed to send me running back to Desmond begging for mercy. I looked at the terrified faces of my team. They were worried that this was the end. They thought the old king had come to crush the rebellion. I closed the folder and looked at Elijah. He was not worried. He was smiling. "He hired Sterling," Elijah said, leaning back in his chair. "That means he is desperate. He is trying to win in the courtroom because he knows he cannot beat us in the market." I picked up the lawsuit and tossed it into the recycling bin in the corner of the room. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the plastic was the only sound in the room. "Let him sue," I said, my voice steady and calm. "He is accusing me of destroying his system. But he forgot one thing. I did not destroy it. His son did. I just set the password. If they want to put Jamal on the stand and ask him under oath why he could not answer a question about his own wife, then I am happy to go to court." I looked at my team. Desmond King wants a legal battle. We will give him one. But while he is paying Arthur Sterling $1,000 an hour to file paperwork, we are going to be out there taking his customers. He is fighting for his pride. We are fighting for his business. Back to work, everyone. We have trucks to move. The courtroom air was stale and cold, smelling of floor polish and old mahogany. It was a theater designed to make you feel small, to make you feel like your fate was already sealed before you even opened your mouth. I sat at the defense table, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Next to me sat Rebecca, the attorney Elijah had hired for me. She was sharp, silent, and terrifyingly competent, but right now she could do nothing but object, while Arthur Sterling put on his show. Sterling paced in front of the jury box like a silver-haired shark. He did not look at the stack of evidence files on his table. He did not look at the technical reports about server maintenance. He looked directly at me. He pointed a manicured finger in my direction, his face twisted into a mask of pity and disdain. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sterling began, his voice smooth as oil. "This is not a complex case. The defense wants to bore you with technical jargon about encryption keys and administrative protocols. They want to confuse you with the minutiae of supply chain management. But do not be fooled. This case is not about computers. It is about emotion." He walked closer to the jury, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is about a woman who gave the best years of her life to a family only to realize she was no longer needed. It is about a woman who reached a certain age and realized her time in the sun was over." I felt the eyes of the 12 jurors land on me. Some looked curious, some looked sympathetic. But Sterling was painting a picture that was hard to ignore. He was painting me as the villain in a soap opera. "Look at the defendant," Sterling said, gesturing broadly. "She is intelligent. No one denies that. But she is also human. And when her husband asked for a divorce, when the company she thought she owned moved on to a younger, fresher vision, she did not accept it with grace. She did not leave with dignity. She snapped." From the bench behind the plaintiff's table, I heard a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. A giggle. It was high-pitched and cruel. I did not have to turn around to know it was Ashley. She was sitting next to Jamal, whispering something in his ear, her hand covering her mouth, but her eyes dancing with amusement. She found this funny. She thought watching another woman being dissected in public was premium content. Sterling ignored the noise, or perhaps he was encouraged by it. He continued his assault. "She is a bitter woman, ladies and gentlemen. A scorned woman. And we all know the old saying about a woman scorned. She decided that if she could not have the company, no one could. She changed those passwords not to secure data, but to punish her husband. It was an act of domestic vengeance masked as corporate security." He walked back to his table and leaned on it, looking at Desmond King, who sat with his arms crossed, looking like a benevolent patriarch who had been wronged by an ungrateful child. "She realized she was expired," Sterling said, using the word Desmond had branded me with. "And instead of stepping aside for the next generation, she decided to burn the house down. She is not a victim here. She is a saboteur. She is a vindictive ex-wife who used her access to exact a personal toll of $50 million. I sat perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not frown. I let the words wash over me like dirty water. Bitter, scorned, expired. They were trying to reduce my entire career, my strategic brilliance and my 13 years of sacrifice down to a stereotype. They wanted the jury to see a sad, lonely woman acting out of jealousy. I looked at Ashley, who was now checking her reflection in her phone screen, bored with the legal arguments. I looked at Jamal, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Let them tell their story, I thought. Let them rely on stereotypes and insults. Because when it was my turn to speak, I was not going to talk about feelings. I was going to talk about facts. And the fact was that they were not losing money because I was bitter. They were losing money because they were incompetent. Sterling could call me whatever he wanted, but he could not explain why their trucks were empty and mine were full. Rebecca stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her charcoal suit. She did not pace like Sterling. She did not shout. She moved with the quiet, lethal precision of a surgeon about to make the final cut. She walked toward the jury box, holding a single thin file in her hand. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer the silence of judgment. It was the silence of anticipation. "Mr. Sterling has told you a very moving story." Rebecca began, her voice clear and grounded. "He spoke of duty. He spoke of loyalty. He spoke of the sacred bond between an employer and an employee. He claims that Ms. Davis violated that bond. He claims she breached her employment contract and her fiduciary duties on the night of December 31st. She paused, letting the date hang in the air. "But there is a flaw in Mr. Sterling's story. A fatal flaw. You cannot breach a contract that does not exist." Desmond King frowned, leaning forward in his seat. I saw him whisper something to Sterling, who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Rebecca turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit B into evidence. This is a copy of Viola Davis' Standard Executive Employment Agreement. She walked over to the plaintiff's table and placed a copy in front of Desmond. Then she turned back to the jury. Can anyone tell me the date listed in Clause 4, Section A, the section regarding the term of employment? She waited a beat, then answered her own question. It states that the employment term shall be for a period of 2 years commencing on July 1, 2023, and ending on June 30, 2025. Unless renewed in writing by the Director of Human Resources. Rebecca turned her gaze directly to Jamal, who was sitting next to his father, trying to make himself as small as possible. The Director of Human Resources is Mr. Jamal King. Is that correct? Jamal swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Rebecca continued relentless. We have subpoenaed the HR records of King Logistics. We looked for a renewal letter. We looked for an extension. We looked for a new contract signed by Ms. Davis after June 30th. Do you know what we found? She held up her empty hand. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jurors were leaning forward now. On July 1st, Ms. Davis' contract expired. Rebecca said, her voice ringing with triumph. For the last 6 months, she has not been an employee of King Logistics. She has essentially been a volunteer. She was working without a contract, without a non-compete clause, and without any legal obligation to the company. She was a free agent. She turned to face Desmond King, who had turned a shade of pale gray that matched the courtroom walls. When Ms. Davis changed the passwords on New Year's Eve, she was not an employee sabotaging a company. She was a private citizen securing her own intellectual property, which she created while she was technically unemployed. The plaintiff claims she was fired, but the truth is she could not be fired, because according to your own paperwork, she did not work there anymore. I watched Desmond turn slowly toward Jamal. The look in his eyes was terrifying. It was the look of a man realizing that his son's incompetence had not just cost him a server, but the entire war. Jamal had been so busy enjoying the lifestyle of an executive that he had forgotten to do the one thing his job required. He had forgotten to sign the paperwork to keep the golden goose in the cage. Rebecca closed the file with a soft snap. Mr. Sterling called my client expired, she said, looking at the lawyer who was now frantically shuffling through his papers. It seems he was right. Her contract was indeed expired. And because of that, she is free. I looked at the jury. They were no longer looking at me with pity. They were looking at Jamal with disbelief. The narrative had flipped in the span of 2 minutes. I was not the bitter ex-wife. I was the competent professional who had been working for free because her husband was too lazy to file a renewal form. And now I was walking out the door, and there was not a single legal chain they could use to stop me. The courtroom was silent, but the air was thick with the static of impending doom. Rebecca did not sit down after revealing the expired contract. She remained standing, her hand resting on a stack of documents that was nearly a foot high. She looked at the judge and then she looked at Desmond King. It was a look of absolute professional pity. Your Honor? Rebecca said, her voice calm and steady. The plaintiff has accused my client of damaging the company. They claim her actions on New Year's Eve caused financial harm. But we would like to submit evidence that the damage to King Logistics began long before Ms. Davis changed a password. In fact, we have evidence that the current management is not just incompetent, but actively engaging in criminal activity. Desmond King stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Objection. This is a character assassination. Overruled, the judge said, his gavel coming down with a sharp crack. Sit down, Mr. King. Let her speak. Rebecca picked up a document with a government seal. Defense Exhibit C. This is a customs declaration form filed 3 days ago at the Port of Miami. It concerns a shipment of live seafood. The form is signed by Ashley King. She turned to the jury, holding the paper up. On this federal document, Ms. King declared 2 tons of live lobster as companion animals to avoid FDA inspection fees. She certified under penalty of perjury that these animals were not for human consumption. A gasp went through the room. I looked at Ashley. She was not looking at the jury. She was texting, probably updating her followers on her courtroom outfit. She had no idea that she had just committed a felony on public record. Rebecca continued, relentless. Falsifying federal customs documents is a crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison. But that is just the beginning. She picked up another stack of papers. Defense Exhibit D. These are internal memos and text messages sent by Ashley King to the Human Resources Department. She began to read. January 4th. Fire Marcus immediately. He is too old and his energy is stale. We need fresh faces. January 5th. Get rid of Sarah. She is a grandmother. She should be at home knitting, not clearing cargo. Rebecca looked at the jury, her eyes hard. This is textbook age discrimination. It is a violation of the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Every single person Ms. King fired in the last 2 weeks has grounds to sue King Logistics. And since Mr. Jamal King, the director of HR, approved these terminations, he is personally liable as well. Desmond slumped in his chair. He looked at his son, who was staring at the table, terrified. He looked at Ashley, who was checking her makeup in her compact mirror, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just dismantled the family empire. We have statements from 20 former employees, Rebecca said, piling the evidence on the table like bricks. We have safety violations from the warehouse where emergency exits were painted over because the color red was not on brand. We have evidence of hazardous materials being stored next to textiles because the boxes looked cute together. She turned to Desmond. Mr. King, you are suing my client for $50 million. But based on these documents, you are facing federal indictments, class action lawsuits from your former staff, and fines from the FDA that will exceed your company's total value. I watched Desmond. The fight had left him. The arrogance was gone. He looked at me across the aisle, and for the first time in 13 years, he did not see a servant or a subordinate. He saw the woman who had kept him out of prison. He saw the woman who had cleaned up the messes, kept the books balanced, and ensured the laws were followed. He realized in that moment that I had not been his employee. I had been his shield, and he had thrown me away. Now he was standing naked in front of the federal government, and there was no one left to protect him. Rebecca closed the file. The defense rests your honor, and we move for an immediate dismissal of all charges, and we suggest the plaintiff save his legal fees. He is going to need them for his bail hearing. The gavel did not bang down immediately. The judge sat in silence for a long moment, looking over the rim of his glasses at the mountain of evidence Rebecca had piled on the bench. He flipped through the customs forms signed by Ashley, he looked at the expired employment contract, and he shook his head slowly. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, filling every corner of the silent courtroom. Mr. King, the judge said, looking directly at Desmond. In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen many frivolous lawsuits. But this is not just frivolous. This is a waste of taxpayer money and an insult to this court. You came here claiming damages from a former employee when the evidence clearly shows that the only damage inflicted on your company was caused by your own negligence and the criminal incompetence of your family members. Desmond tried to stand up to protest, to say something that would regain control of the narrative, but his legs felt heavy like lead. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "Sit down, Mr. King." The judge ordered, his voice sharp. "I am dismissing this case with prejudice. That means you cannot file it again, but I am not done. Based on the evidence presented by the defense regarding falsified federal documents and discriminatory hiring practices, I am ordering the court stenographer to forward a certified copy of these transcripts to the United States District Attorney's Office." The words hit Desmond like a physical blow. The district attorney. That meant criminal investigations. That meant prison time. I am also recommending that the Department of Labor open an immediate audit of King Logistics. the judge continued. You wanted the law to get involved, Mr. King. Well, you have your wish. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. Desmond felt a sudden sharp pressure in the center of his chest. It started small like a knot of tension, but within seconds it expanded, radiating out into his left arm and up into his jaw. The room began to swim. The mahogany walls seemed to tilt, and the fluorescent lights above blurred into bright, streaking halos. Dad. Jamal's voice sounded far away, as if he were speaking from underwater. Dad, are you okay? You look gray. Desmond tried to take a breath, but his lungs refused to expand. It felt as if an elephant were sitting on his ribcage, crushing the life out of him. He looked at Jamal, seeing the panic in his son's eyes. He looked at Ashley, who was frantically typing on her phone, probably asking her followers for legal advice. Fools! He gasped the word, barely a whisper. I gave it all to fools. The pain spiked, a jagged bolt of lightning tearing through his heart. Desmond clutched at his chest, his fingers scrabbling against his silk tie. He tried to stay upright. He tried to maintain the image of the unshakable patriarch, but his body had finally given out under the weight of his own hubris. He pitched forward. His knees hit the floor first, followed by the rest of his body with a heavy, sickening thud. Dad Jamal screamed, scrambling out of his chair. Help! Somebody help him! He is not breathing. Chaos erupted in the courtroom. The bailiffs rushed forward, their radios crackling. The judge was shouting for a medic. Ashley stood frozen, covering her mouth with her hand, her phone finally dropping to the floor. I stood perfectly still at the defense table. I watched the man who had been a father figure to me for 13 years, gasping for air on the dirty courtroom floor. I watched the son who had betrayed me uselessly, patting his father's hand. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, not for the tyrant he had become, but for the legacy he had destroyed. Elijah placed a hand on my shoulder, a steady, grounding presence. Come on, Viola, he said softly. There is nothing you can do here. The paramedics are coming. I looked at Desmond one last time. He was looking up, his eyes wide and terrified, searching the room, his gaze locked onto mine. He looked like he wanted to say something, to demand that I fix this one last time. But I just shook my head slowly. I was not his fixer anymore. I turned my back on the chaos and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the Kings to the mercy of the system they had tried to weaponize against me. The sun was setting over Atlanta, turning the skyline into jagged silhouettes against a bruised purple sky. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in my office at Vance Global, holding a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The image of Desmond collapsing in the courtroom was still burned into my retinas. It was a tragedy, but it was a tragedy of his own making. He had pushed his heart just as hard as he had pushed his luck, and both had finally given out. The heavy oak door opened and Elijah walked in. He did not look like a man who had just witnessed a medical emergency. He looked like a predator who had just finished a very satisfying meal. He carried a thick leather portfolio which he placed gently on the center of my desk. How is he? I asked, turning away from the window. Elijah loosened his silk tie and sat on the edge of the desk. Stable. He is in the ICU. The doctors say it was a severe angina attack brought on by acute stress. He will live, but his empire might not. He tapped the leather portfolio with a manicured finger. While Desmond was busy gasping for air, the markets were reacting to the judge's ruling. King Logistics stock is currently trading for less than the price of a cup of coffee. The banks panicked, Viola. They saw the federal investigation coming and they ran for the exits. They called in Desmond's loans. All of them. The operating lines of credit, the mortgage on the warehouse, the financing for the fleet, even the lease on that ridiculous private jet. I frowned, moving closer. But Desmond cannot pay that back. Not with the accounts frozen and the stock tanked. He is insolvent. Exactly. Elijah said, a small, dangerous smile playing on his lips. The banks knew that. They wanted to offload the toxic debt immediately. They wanted to get it off their books before the feds seized the assets. They were desperate to sell the paper to anyone with enough cash to take the risk. He paused, letting the silence stretch out. So I bought it. I stared at him. You bought his debt. Elijah shook his head. No, Viola. We bought his debt. Vance Global is now the primary note holder for King Logistics. I used our partnership capital. I looked down at the portfolio. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped it open. Inside were stacks of promissory notes, liens, and mortgage deeds. Millions of dollars of obligation, all transferred to a holding company controlled by me. I realized with a jolt that I was looking at the deed to my old life. I technically owned the chair Desmond sat in. I owned the warehouse where Ashley was currently filming her panic. I owned the roof over Jamal's head. You are his creditor, Elijah said, his voice low and serious. He does not answer to the bank anymore, Viola. He answers to you. If he wants to keep the lights on, he has to ask you for permission. If he wants to restructure, he has to negotiate with you. You are not just his competitor anymore. You are his landlord. You are the bank. I ran my hand over the papers. They felt like justice, dry and cool to the touch. I remembered the night Desmond told me I was expired. He had threatened to freeze my accounts, to take my car, to leave me with nothing. He had used his financial power to try and crush my dignity. Now the tables had not just turned. They had been smashed to pieces. I closed the portfolio. I am not going to foreclose, I said, my voice steady. Not yet. Elijah raised an eyebrow. No. No, I said, walking back to the window. That is too easy. I want them to know. I want Desmond to wake up in that hospital bed and realize that the woman he threw away is the only thing standing between him and the street. I want him to know that every time he turns on a light switch, it is because I allowed it. Send the notice, Elijah. Tell him the new ownership is coming to collect. And tell him to have the books ready. I want to see exactly what they have destroyed. The reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror was sharp and clear. 6 months ago, I had stared at a stranger in a bus station window, a woman washed out by rain and rejection. Tonight, the woman staring back at me was vibrant. I reached for the dress hanging on the valet. It was not the safe, invisible black I used to wear to blend into the background of Desmond's parties. It was scarlet, a deep, unapologetic crimson that looked like liquid fire. As I stepped into the silk and pulled the zipper up my spine, I felt the fabric settle against my skin like armor. The designer called the color Inferno, but I knew what it really was. It was the color of a phoenix rising from the ashes. It was the color of the blood I had put into my work, and the fire that had kept me warm when they tried to freeze me out. I applied my lipstick, matching the shade perfectly. There was no hesitation in my hands tonight, no trembling. I was 39 years old. I was a majority shareholder. I was the architect of my own salvation. I smoothed the skirt, looking at the way it caught the light. Tonight, I was not going to a party to serve anyone. I was going to be crowned. The expired woman was dead. Long live the queen. The valet looked confused when the beige rental sedan pulled up to the curb. It rattled slightly as the engine cut out, a stark contrast to the line of limousines. Jamal stepped out first. He looked like a ghost of his former self, his tuxedo hanging loosely off a frame that had grown gaunt and skeletal. He opened the back door not for a CEO, but for a defeated old man and his wife. Ashley climbed out, and for a moment nobody recognized her. The influencer who lived for the camera was gone. Her face was bare and pale, stripped of filters and contouring. She looked tired, ordinary, and small. They huddled together, walking quickly toward the entrance, trying to disappear. Then the air in the driveway changed. A sleek midnight blue Maybach glided into the spot they had just vacated. The door opened and Elijah stepped out, extending a hand. I took it and stepped onto the red carpet. The cameras went wild. My red dress caught the flashbulbs, blazing like a signal fire in the night. I walked with my head high, holding Elijah's arm not as a guest, but as a conqueror. I saw Jamal look back, his eyes filled with a crushing, hollow regret. He was looking at his past and realizing it was the brightest thing he would ever see again. The presenter leaned into the microphone, his voice echoing through the crystal chandeliered ballroom. And the award for CEO of the Year goes to a woman who redefined resilience. Viola Davis, of Vance Global. For a split second there was silence. Then the room exploded. It was not polite applause. It was a roar. A standing ovation that started in the front row and swept back like a tidal wave. Men and women who had ignored me for years were now on their feet clapping until their hands hurt, honoring the empire I had built from nothing but grit and a Greyhound ticket. I stood up, the red silk of my dress flowing around me. I walked toward the stage, the spotlight warm on my face. In the shadows of the back row sat a figure in a wheelchair. Desmond King gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. He watched the industry he used to rule bow down to the woman he had thrown away. He watched the spotlight follow me, leaving him in the dark. His face was twisted not just with jealousy, but with the agonizing taste of his own medicine. He had called me expired. But as I took the crystal trophy in my hands, the whole world knew the truth. I was just getting started. The crystal trophy felt cool and heavy in my hands, a solid weight that anchored me to the stage. I looked out at the sea of faces, the applause finally dying down to a respectful silence. I did not look at the teleprompter. I did not need prepared remarks for this. I looked past the bright lights, past the cheering front row, and locked my eyes on the shadows in the back. I found him, Desmond King, sitting in his wheelchair looking small and bitter. "I have one final person to thank," I said, my voice steady and amplified through the hall. "I want to thank the man who told me I was too old. I want to thank the man who said I was expired. Thank you. Because of you, I was forced to step out into the world and ask a simple question. What is my worth? You thought my 13 years of experience was a liability. But I discovered that on the open market, that experience is worth exactly $50 million. You gave me the greatest gift of all, Desmond. You set me free to bankrupt you. This award is for the expired women. We are just getting started." The heels of my red shoes clicked on the marble floor of the lobby, a rhythm of victory. I was halfway to the waiting car when I heard him. "Viola, wait." Jamal came running, stumbling in his ill-fitting tuxedo. He did not look like the man I married. He looked like a frightened child. He threw himself in front of me, actually dropping to his knees on the cold stone in front of the gathered press and guests. "Viola, please," he sobbed, grabbing at the air near the hem of my dress. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I love you. We can fix this. Please let me come home. I cannot live in that rental anymore." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity. Just a vast, empty distance. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thick cream envelope. I did not offer him a hand up. I just held out the paper. "This is not an invitation, Jamal." I said, my voice soft and final. "These are divorce papers, and underneath them is an eviction notice. You have 48 hours to vacate the house." He looked up, blinking through his tears, confusion warring with his grief. "But the house, that is our home. Where will I go?" I shook my head. "No, Jamal. That is my home. I bought the deed 3 years before I met you. You never paid a dime on the mortgage. You were just a guest who overstayed his welcome. And your reservation is canceled." I stepped around him, leaving him kneeling in the empty hall, holding the paperwork of his own destruction, while I walked out into the night that belonged entirely to me. The heavy glass doors of the hotel swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Jamal's weeping. I walked toward the waiting car where Elijah stood like a sentinel in the moonlight. He did not say a word. He simply opened the rear door, his eyes full of a quiet pride that meant more than any applause. I slid into the soft leather seat, the red silk of my dress settling around me like the petals of a closing flower. From the driver's seat, Maya turned around. Her tough, guarded expression was gone, replaced by a grin that lit up the dark interior of the car. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and genuine affection. "You were legendary, Auntie V," she said, her voice warm. "You did not just drop the mic, you dropped the whole building on them. I have never seen anything like it." I smiled, feeling the tension of the last 6 months finally drain out of my shoulders. It was necessary, Maya. Sometimes you have to burn the dead wood so the forest can grow again. Through the tinted window, I watched the pathetic tableau unfolding on the sidewalk. It looked like a scene from a tragedy. Desmond sat in his wheelchair, a king without a kingdom, staring blankly into the void. Jamal was still slumped on the cold stone, a man who had lost his home because he forgot to pay attention to the woman who built it. And then there was Ashley. Even in the middle of their ruin, she could not help herself. She was holding her phone up, the ring light clipped to the top, casting a harsh, ghostly glow on her tear-streaked face. She was live streaming, trying to spin a narrative of victimhood, trying to get the internet to feel sorry for the girl who killed the lobsters. I pulled out my phone and checked the feed for one last time. The hearts were not floating up the screen. It was a stream of laughing emojis and clown faces. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur, but I caught a few. One read, "You messed with the wrong queen." Another said, "Team Viola forever." The world had finally seen through the filter. She was looking for pity, but she was only finding ridicule. Elijah took my hand, his grip warm and solid, anchoring me to the moment. He did not look back at the people we were leaving behind. He looked only at me. "Where to partner?" he asked. I looked ahead at the Atlanta skyline. The city lights were glittering like diamonds, a vast ocean of opportunity waiting for us. I did not see rain anymore. I saw only brilliance. "Home," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "The real one." Maya nodded and shifted the car into gear. The engine purred a deep, powerful sound, and we glided away into the darkness, leaving the wreckage of the King Empire fading in our rearview mirror. They were the past, small and shrinking with every second. We were the future, and the road ahead was wide open. The most profound lesson from Viola's story is that true value lies in competence, experience, and resilience, not in superficial image. When Desmond dismissed Viola as expired, he failed to realize that wisdom and skill are assets that never depreciate. The story teaches us that we must never internalize the disrespect of others. Your worth is not determined by a job title or someone else's opinion. When you know your value, rejection is simply redirection. Do not fear starting over from zero, because if you built it once, you have the power to build it again even better. If you are ready to turn your pain into power and prove that your potential has no expiration date, hit that like button and share this story. Subscribe now and let's build our legacies together, because the best revenge is massive success.